The ink glowed wet under the black light. My stepmother, Sarah, had rewritten my mother's suicide note 3 times, and the last one wasn't even dry yet. I clutched the torn page, my fingers shaking, as footsteps pounded down the hall. Mike was coming, and if he found me with this, I'd be the next name on Sarah's list. The desk drawer was still open, the secret compartment gaping like a wound. I had seconds to decide. Run or fight. The ink wasn't just fresh, it was still bleeding. The mahogany desk smelled of stale cedar and lemon wax. Leo Miller pried the hidden latch, his fingernail catching on a splintered groove. A false bottom groaned upward, revealing 3 sheets of cream-colored stationery. He smoothed the first page against the blotter. The looped L in love mimicked his mother's elegant hand, yet the ink bled where the pen had stalled. Sarah always rushed her curls. He traced the jagged descender of an eye, the pressure of the nib having nearly punctured the fiber. This wasn't a final goodbye. It was a rehearsal. The second draft lay beneath, identical in sentiment but corrected for spacing. Sarah's forged cursive shimmered under the dim lamp, too precise, too clinical. His mother's real handwriting resembled a frantic vine, never these cold, calculated rows. Leo's heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. He wasn't just looking at paper, he was looking at the blueprint of a murder committed 4 years ago. The air in the study felt thick, heavy with the scent of old paper and the metallic tang of his own fear. He reached for the third sheet, his fingers trembling. This one was the most polished, the one that had been used to convince the world that his mother had simply given up. A floorboard creaked in the hallway. Leo froze. He didn't just hear the sound, he felt it vibrate through the soles of his sneakers. The house was usually a tomb this time of day, but the rhythm of those footsteps was unmistakable. It wasn't the light, airy step of his father. It was heavy, deliberate. Mike, Sarah's brother. Leo scrambled to shove the papers back into the dark slit of the compartment, but his hands were clumsy with adrenaline. The wood clicked, but the latch wouldn't seat. The door swung open with a violent bang that echoed off the high ceilings. "What the hell are you doing in here, kid?" Mike's voice was a low growl. He stood in the doorway, a wall of a man with scarred knuckles and a neck so thick it swallowed his collar. He began to crack his knuckles, one by one, then the thumbs. Pop, pop, pop. The sound was like small bones snapping in the silence. Leo's middle finger instinctively shot up to push his glasses higher on the bridge of his nose. His other hand went to his pocket, fingers finding the cold, hard plastic of the 3D-printed robotic spider. Click, 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 click. One for each leg on the left side. The 4 ghosts were watching. They had to be. "Just looking for some tax records for Dad," Leo said, his voice cracking. He tried to slide past Mike, his shoulder brushing the man's massive chest. It felt like hitting a brick wall. "Tax records?" Mike sneered. His eyes darted to the desk, landing on the corner of the cream stationery poking out from the hidden slit. "You're a liar. You've always been a little rat, digging where you don't belong." Mike lunged. His hand, as broad as a shovel, clamped onto Leo's shoulder, the fingers digging into the muscle. Leo gasped as the man slammed him back against the mahogany desk. The brass handles bit into Leo's lower back, cold and unforgiving. The smell of Mike's sweat, sour and sharp, filled Leo's nostrils. "Give me the papers, Leo," Mike hissed. "No." Leo shoved back, his lanky frame no match for Mike's bulk, but fueled by a sudden, electric terror. He kicked out, his sneaker connecting squarely with Mike's shin. Mike roared in pain, his grip loosening for a fraction of a second. Leo didn't wait. He snatched the top sheet of the forged notes, the one with the jagged eye, and bolted. He didn't head for the hallway. Mike was blocking that. Instead, he dove for the French doors leading to the terrace. He threw them open, the humid July air hitting him like a physical weight. Behind him, he heard the heavy thud of Mike's boots on the hardwood and the sound of a chair being overturned. Leo didn't look back. He sprinted across the manicured lawn, the grass slick with evening dew. His lungs burned, the 85-degree heat making every breath feel like he was inhaling steam. He scrambled over the stone perimeter wall, the rough granite scraping his palms, and disappeared into the shadows of the neighboring woods. Toby Wilson's house was a fortress of paranoia. Every window was a black eye watching the street, and the thin walls offered no protection from the feeling of being overheard. Leo didn't knock. He used the spare key hidden inside a fake plastic rock near the porch. "Toby, Toby, I need you," Leo shouted as he burst into the living room. 12, 13, 14, a voice whispered from the top of the stairs. Toby appeared, wearing an oversized gray hoodie despite the heat. He looked down at Leo, his thick-rimmed glasses reflecting the blue light from a nearby computer monitor. 13 steps, Leo. You broke my rhythm. Why are you bleeding? Leo looked down at his hands. His palms were raw from the stone wall, and a dark bruise was already forming on his forearm where Mike had gripped him. I found them, Toby. The notes. Sarah wrote them. She killed her. Toby's eyes widened. He hurried down the stairs, counting under his breath until he reached the bottom. He led Leo into his bedroom, a space crammed with dismantled hardware and glowing screens. A single red LED on a smoke detector flickered on the ceiling, pulsing rhythmically like a heartbeat. "Show me," Toby whispered. Leo pulled the crumpled, torn page from his pocket. It was only half a sheet, but the cursive was clear. Toby laid it flat on a workbench and switched off the overhead light. He reached for a handheld black light, the bulb humming with a low-frequency buzz that made the hair on Leo's neck stand up. As the purple light bathed the paper, the ink began to glow with an eerie neon intensity. "That's strange," Toby muttered, leaning in until his nose almost touched the fiber. "Leo, look at the edges of the strokes." Leo looked. He expected to see the dry, cracked residue of 4-year-old ink. Instead, the ink looked raised, almost wet. It had a shimmering, oily quality that hadn't yet settled into the paper's grain. "The chemical composition, it hasn't stabilized," Toby said, his voice trembling. "Leo, this ink isn't from 4 years ago. It's fresh, like written within the last hour, fresh." Leo felt the world tilt. The floorboards beneath him seemed to liquefy. "She isn't just practicing the past," he whispered, his fingers frantically tapping the spider in his pocket. Click, 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 click. "She's drafting a new one. She's going to kill Dad." The realization hit him like a physical blow to the stomach. The air in Toby's room suddenly smelled of ozone and scorched dust. Sarah wasn't just a murderer. She was a predator in the middle of a hunt. The walk back to the Miller estate felt like a march to the gallows. Leo let himself in through the kitchen door, hoping to slip upstairs unnoticed. The house was silent, save for the rhythmic thrum-thrum of the air conditioning struggling against the summer swelter. "Leo? Is that you?" The voice came from the living room. It wasn't Sarah. It was his father. Leo walked into the room, his heart lifting for a brief second. David Miller sat in his leather recliner, but he looked smaller than usual, slumped, gray. He was rubbing his wedding ring, the gold band from Leo's mother, with a frantic, repetitive motion of his thumb. On the coffee table sat Leo's laptop. "Dad, I have to tell you something," Leo started, his words rushing out. "About Sarah, about the desk, I found—" "I know what you've been doing, Leo," David interrupted. His voice was flat, devoid of its usual warmth. He turned the laptop screen toward Leo. Leo's stomach dropped. The browser history was open. Untraceable cardiac toxins. Suicide methods for teens. How to write a convincing farewell. "I didn't search for those," Leo gasped. "Dad, you have to believe me. Sarah, she must have used my login. She's framing me." David stood up, his heavy, perpetual sigh deflating his chest. "Sarah told me you were struggling. She said you'd been acting erratic, staying up all night, talking to that plastic toy. I didn't want to believe her. I thought it was just grief. But this," he gestured to the screen, "this is a cry for help, Leo. Or something worse." "It's a setup," Leo screamed, the sound echoing off the mahogany walls. "Look at the timestamps. I was at Toby's when those searches were made. Sarah said you left your phone here. You could have set a timer or used a remote connection. I don't know, Leo. I'm not a computer genius like you." David's face was flushed, a rare flash of anger breaking through his lethargy. "She's worried about you. She's trying to protect this family, and you're obsessed with tearing her down." Subverted beat 2.1. Leo felt a surge of desperate hope. If he could just show David the desk, the secret compartment, the physical evidence of the forgery, the logic would have to win. David was a businessman. He understood data. He understood proof. "Come with me," Leo pleaded, grabbing his father's sleeve. The fabric of David's linen shirt felt damp with sweat. "To the study. I'll show you the drafts. I'll show you the hidden latch. Please, Dad, just 1 minute." David hesitated, his eyes darting toward the hallway as if looking for Sarah's approval. Finally, he nodded. "Fine. Show me. And then we're talking about a doctor." They walked to the study. Leo's pulse thrummed against his collar. He could see it already. The look on his father's face when the false bottom popped up. The realization that his new wife was a monster. They reached the mahogany desk. Leo reached under the lip, his fingers finding the groove. He pressed the latch. The wood clicked. The false bottom stayed shut. Leo frowned, pressing harder. He jammed his thumb into the wood until it bruised. It stuck. It was just working an hour ago. "Leo," David warned. "No, wait." Leo grabbed a letter opener from the desk set. He shoved the metal tip into the seam, prying with all his might. The wood groaned and finally gave way, flipping upward with a sharp crack. Leo stared into the compartment. His breath hitched. It was empty. Not just empty of the papers. It had been scrubbed. The dark, dusty interior was now pristine, smelling strongly of lemon oil and bleach. Every scrap of stationery, every trace of his mother's rehearsed suicide was gone. "There were papers here," Leo whispered, his voice trembling. 3 drafts. One had a jagged eye. "Toby saw the ink under a black light, Dad. It was wet." David stepped back, his expression shifting from anger to a profound, soul-crushing pity. "There's nothing there, Leo. It's just a desk. A desk your mother bought 10 years ago. She cleaned it. Sarah cleaned it while I was at Toby's." Leo spun around, looking for any sign of the intrusion. His eyes landed on the desktop. It was polished to a mirror shine, reflecting the dim yellow light of the floor lamp. "Sarah has been in the kitchen all evening making dinner," David said softly. "Mike was with her. They were talking about the 4th of July party. The betrayal hit Leo like a physical weight, pulling the air from his lungs. He realized then that his father wasn't just being stubborn. He was already gone. Sarah had woven a web of concern and evidence so tight that the truth looked like a delusion. By trying to expose her, Leo had handed her the very tools she needed to destroy his credibility. He stood in the center of the room, the smell of bleach stinging his nose, realizing he was now the primary suspect in his own life. Leo retreated to his bedroom, locking the door and shoving a heavy chair against it. His hands wouldn't stop shaking, wouldn't. He reached into his pocket for the spider, but his fingers hit something else. Something cold. Something metal. He pulled it out. It was a gold locket on a delicate chain. His mother's locket. The breath left his body in a jagged wheeze. This locket had been buried with her. He remembered seeing it around her neck in the casket, the gold gleaming against the white satin lining. He dropped it onto his bed as if it were a live coal. It sat there, a silent psychological threat. Sarah had been in his room. She had bypassed his sensors, his digital eyes, and placed a relic of the dead on his pillow. It was a message. I can touch the things you love. I can reach into the grave. He needed a weapon. Not a plastic spider, but something real. He remembered his father's old toolkit in the garden shed, a heavy pipe wrench and a set of steel shears. He climbed out his window, sliding down the trellis with the practiced ease of a boy who spent more time outside the house than in it. The backyard was a sea of shadows. The air was stagnant, the smell of damp earth and coming rain thick enough to swallow. The garden shed sat at the edge of the property, a small, weathered structure that smelled of gasoline and rust. Leo stepped inside, the floorboards groaning under his weight. He reached for the shelf where the tools were kept, his hand brushing against something soft. A white silk wedding dress hung from a rusty meat hook in the center of the room. Leo recoiled, his heart hammering. It was pristine, glowing in the faint moonlight filtering through the grime-streaked window. It was the only thing in the shed, not covered in dust. Before he could process the sight, a shadow detached itself from the corner. A hand clamped over his mouth, smelling of grease and old cigarettes. A forearm, thick as a tree trunk, wrapped around his throat, cutting off his air. Leo thrashed, his heels drumming against the wooden floor. He couldn't see the attacker's face. They wore a dark, knit mask. But he felt the sheer, overwhelming strength of the man. You should have stayed in your room, little Miller. A muffled voice hissed. Leo's vision began to swim. The smell of gasoline was everywhere, sharp and industrial, stinging the back of his throat. He reached out blindly, his hand grazing a cold, cylindrical shape on the workbench. The fire extinguisher. He fumbled for the pin, his fingers slick with sweat. He felt it give. He swung the heavy canister around and squeezed the handle. A roar of white chemical foam erupted, hitting the intruder full in the face. The man shrieked, his grip loosening as he clawed at his eyes. Leo didn't wait. He shoved past the blinded figure, stumbling out into the night. He didn't look back to see where the man went. He ran for the house, his lungs screaming. The white dress in the shed burned into his retinue like a ghost. Back in the safety of his room, Leo sat on the floor, the locket clutched in his hand. His throat burned where the intruder had squeezed. He needed to know. He needed to understand why Sarah was doing this. He pried the locket open with his thumbnail. He expected to see his mother's face, the soft eyes, the auburn hair. Instead, a different face stared back at him. A black and white photo, yellowed at the edges. It was a young girl, maybe 10 years old, with sharp, predatory eyes and a bobbed haircut. She was standing in front of a grand stone gate, the gate to the Miller estate. The date on the back of the photo was 1985. Sarah hadn't stumbled into their lives 4 years ago. She had been watching, waiting. She had grown up in the shadow of this house, a poor cousin, or perhaps a daughter of the help, harboring a bitterness that had fermented for decades. She hadn't married his father for love, or even for a quick payout. She had come to reclaim a kingdom she believed was hers. "Leo, honey, we need to talk." Sarah's voice was melodic, dangerously slow. She stood in the doorway of the kitchen the next morning, her sharp hair perfectly in place. She was holding a tray with 2 cups of tea. "Your father and I are very worried," she continued, setting the tray on the granite island. The smell of chamomile and something bitter, almond, drifted through the air. The outbursts, the fighting in the shed. It's too much for a young man to carry alone. David stood behind her, his hand on her shoulder. He wouldn't meet Leo's eyes. "We've made a decision," Sarah said, her smile never reaching her cold eyes. "There's a wonderful wellness retreat in the valley, a place where you can get the rest you need. We've booked you in for tomorrow, July 5th. "A psychiatric facility," Leo spat. "You're locking me up so you can finish what you started with Mom." "Leo, please," David whispered. "It's for the best. To keep the family safe." "Safe from what? From her?" Leo pointed at Sarah. Sarah sighed, a sound of practiced heartbreak. "You see, David? He's lost in the narrative again. Why don't you go pack your things, Leo? I'll bring your tea up in a moment." Leo didn't pack. He waited until he heard the front door close, David leaving for a peace and quiet walk. He waited until he heard the hum of the vacuum in the far wing of the house. He slipped into Sarah's bedroom. The room was sterile, white on white, smelling of expensive perfume and bleach. He went straight for the closet. He pushed aside the designer dresses until he found a small, locked safe. He didn't have the code, but he had something better. He pulled a small, high-frequency vibrator from his pocket, a tool he'd built for testing structural integrity in his robots. He pressed it against the keypad. The lock shrieked, the internal tumblers vibrating until the mechanism gave way with a satisfying thunk. Inside wasn't money. It was a digital camera. Leo turned it on, the screen flickering to life. He scrolled through the photos. His breath caught. There was Sarah, sitting in a dark booth at a diner. Opposite her was Mike. And next to Mike was a woman in a sharp blazer, Jennifer Evans, the family's insurance agent. They were huddled over a document, a life insurance policy for David Miller. The payout was $5 million. There were more photos. Sarah and Mike in the garden shed, standing next to the white wedding dress. Sarah holding a syringe, her face twisted in a look of pure, cold calculation. "Found what you were looking for?" Leo spun around. Sarah was leaning against the doorframe. She wasn't smiling anymore. In her hand, she held a heavy glass award, a Philanthropist of the Year trophy she'd coerced David into winning. "You're a monster," Leo said, clutching the camera to his chest. "I'm a survivor, Leo. There's a difference." She lunged. The struggle was brutal. Sarah was stronger than she looked, her movements precise and fueled by a lifetime of rage. She swung the glass award, the heavy bass whistling past Leo's ear. It connected with a porcelain vase on the nightstand, sending shards of blue and white flying like shrapnel. Leo tried to dive for the door, but Sarah grabbed his hair, yanking his head back. He cried out, the camera slipping from his fingers and skittering across the hardwood. "That's mine," she hissed, pinning him against the wall. She slammed her forearm against his throat, the same move the intruder had used in the shed. Everything in this house is mine. She reached for the camera, her fingers brushing the plastic casing. A siren wailed in the distance. Sarah froze. She looked toward the window, her grip loosening just enough for Leo to shove her away. He scrambled for the camera, but a heavy boot stepped on his wrist. Problem here? Leo looked up, relief flooding through him. It was Detective Thorne, their neighbor, a man of the law. "Detective, thank God," Leo gasped. "I have it. The evidence, the photos. She's planning to kill my father." Thorne looked at the camera, then at Sarah. He straightened his tie, left, right, center. A slow, used car salesman's smile spread across his face. "Is that so, Leo?" Thorne asked. He reached down and picked up the camera. Subverted beat 3.5. Leo felt his shoulders drop. The tension that had been coiled in his chest for days began to unfurl. "She's working with Mike and the insurance agent. It's all on there, the meetings, the policies. You have to arrest her." Thorne turned the camera over in his hands, admiring the lens. "It's a nice piece of equipment, expensive." He looked at Sarah. "What do you think, cousin?" Leo's heart stopped. "Cousin?" Sarah smoothed her hair, her composure returning like a mask being snapped back into place. "He's been very difficult, Robert. I think the stress of the move has finally broken him." Thorne nodded, his eyes turning back to Leo. The warmth was gone, replaced by a cold, predatory gleam. "You know, Leo, the law's a funny thing. It's all about who tells the story first. And right now, the story is that a disturbed young man attacked his mother in a fit of paranoid delusion." "No," Leo whispered, backing away. "I have the note. The torn page." He reached into his pocket, his fingers searching for the scrap of paper Toby had analyzed. Thorne was faster. He grabbed Leo's arm, twisting it behind his back with a professional, agonizing efficiency. He reached into Leo's pocket and pulled out the torn fragment of the forged cursive. "This?" Thorne asked, holding the paper up to the light. "Looks like trash to me." He pulled a silver Zippo lighter from his pocket. The flame flickered, a small, dancing orange tongue. He held the corner of the paper to the fire. "Wait, no!" Leo screamed, struggling against Thorne's grip. The paper curled, the edges turning black and then vanishing into gray ash. The evidence of the wet ink, the proof of Sarah's current plot, disappeared in a matter of seconds. Thorne dropped the charred remains onto the floor and ground them into the rug with his heel. "And as for this..." Thorne looked at the digital camera. He opened the side port and popped out the small memory card. He snapped it in half between his thumb and forefinger with a sickening crack. He tossed the broken plastic into the trash can. "There," Thorne said, patting Leo on the cheek. "Now there's no more evidence to worry about. Just a boy who needs a lot of help." Leo looked at Sarah. She was smiling now, a genuine, terrifying smile of victory. He realized with a sickening clarity that he hadn't just failed. He had walked right into the heart of the conspiracy. The wall he had been hitting every time he tried to go to the authorities wasn't bureaucracy. It was family. He was trapped in a house with 3 predators, and the fireworks were about to begin. The sun began to set, casting long, bloody shadows across the kitchen floor. Outside, the first pops of the neighborhood fireworks echoed through the stagnant air. "Time for your medicine, Leo," Sarah said. She was standing at the stove, stirring a small pot of tea. The smell of almond was stronger now, cloying and sweet. Thorne sat at the kitchen table, his mismatched socks, one blue, one black, visible as he crossed his legs. He was filling out a report, his pen scratching rhythmically against the paper. "The transport will be here at 9 p.m., Thorne said without looking up, just in time for the grand finale. Leo sat in a chair, his hands zip-tied behind his back. He felt a strange, cold calm settling over him. It was the clarity of the doomed. He looked at the smart home hub mounted on the wall, a sleek, brushed aluminum interface that controlled everything from the lights to the security cameras. He had built that system. He knew every line of its code. He knew its vulnerabilities. "I need to go to the bathroom," Leo said, his voice flat. "Nice try," Mike growled, leaning against the refrigerator. "Let him go," Sarah said, her voice dripping with mock compassion. "It's a long drive to the facility. Mike, take him to the powder room. Keep the door cracked." Mike grabbed Leo by the collar and hauled him toward the small bathroom off the kitchen. He shoved him inside, leaving the door open a few inches. Leo didn't go to the toilet. He knelt by the baseboard, his fingers finding a small, hidden panel he'd installed months ago, just in case. Inside was a direct hardware link to the house's central server. He didn't have a keyboard, but he had his spider. He pulled the 3D-printed toy from his pocket. People thought it was a fidget toy, but it was a masterpiece of hobbyist engineering. Inside its plastic thorax was a high-capacity data burst transmitter. He plugged the spider's legs into the server ports. Click, 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 click. The house's lights flickered. What was that? Sarah's voice rose from the kitchen. "Just the grid," Thorne replied. "The whole neighborhood is drawing power for the parties." Leo's fingers flew over the spider's touch-sensitive back. He wasn't just hacking the lights. He was rerouting the internal nanny cam feeds, the ones Sarah thought she'd disabled. He was bypassing the firewall and slinging the live video stream onto the neighborhood's public community app, the one everyone used to complain about lost dogs and noisy parties. On the screen of the smart hub in the kitchen, a red light began to pulse. "Leo, what are you doing in there?" Mike yelled, kicking the door open. Leo stood up, the spider back in his pocket. "Just finishing the diagnostic." Mike dragged him back into the kitchen. Sarah was standing there with a syringe, the needle gleaming under the fluorescent lights. "This will help you sleep, Leo," she said, stepping toward him. "It's better this way. No more fighting, no more ghosts." She grabbed his arm, the needle hovering over his vein. "You should check the app, Sarah," Leo whispered. "What?" "The community app. My dad's on it. So is the mayor and the chief of police from the next town over." Thorne's phone buzzed on the table. Then Mike's. Then Sarah's. Sarah looked down at her screen. Her face went pale, the curated warmth vanishing instantly. On the screen was a live, high-definition feed of the kitchen. There was Sarah, holding the syringe. There was Thorne, the hero detective, watching a bound teenager be drugged. There was Mike, the heavy, looming over the scene like a common thug. And in the background, the audio was crystal clear. "Finish what you started with, Mom." "I'm a survivor, Leo. There's a difference." "You little brat," Sarah hissed, lunging for him with the needle. The front door exploded inward. It wasn't the transport team. It was David, his face a mask of horror and fury, followed by two officers in uniforms Leo didn't recognize. Not Thorne's precinct. "Get away from him!" David roared. The next few minutes were a blur of shouting, the metallic snick of real handcuffs, and the smell of ozone as the smart system finally short-circuited, sending sparks flying from the wall hub. Sarah and Mike were tackled near the kitchen island, their faces pressed into the granite they had worked so hard to steal. Thorne tried to bolt for the back door, but he was met by a wall of blue. The fireworks were over, leaving the smell of sulfur and burnt paper hanging in the cool night air. Leo sat on the front porch, a blanket draped over his shoulders. His father sat beside him, his hand resting on Leo's neck. "I'm so sorry, Leo," David whispered. "I was so blind. I wanted to believe in the lie because the truth was too quiet." Leo reached into his pocket and pulled out the gold locket. He handed it to his father. "She's been watching us since 1985, Dad. She didn't want you. She wanted the house. She wanted the life she thought we stole from her." David opened the locket, staring at the photo of the young Sarah. He closed it with a heavy click. "We're leaving, Leo. Tonight. We'll go to the cabin in Vermont. We'll sell this place. We'll start over." Leo looked back at the mahogany-paneled walls, the plush carpets, the perfect stage set. It didn't look like a kingdom anymore. It looked like a cage. The drive to Vermont was long and silent. Leo watched the lights of the city fade in the rearview mirror, replaced by the deep, mournful green of the pine forests. The air was different here. Thin, cold, and smelling of nothing but earth and sky. They stopped at a remote, frozen clearing to stretch their legs. In the center of the clearing stood a single, old-fashioned telephone booth. The cord was cut, the glass frosted with ice. Leo walked up to it, resting his hand on the cold metal. He felt a sense of quiet strength vibrating in his chest. He wasn't the boy who watched the fire from the lawn anymore. He was the one who had rewired the trap. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the 3D printed spider. He looked at it for a long time, then set it on the shelf inside the phone booth. "Goodbye, guys," he whispered to the four ghosts. He walked back to the car. David was waiting, the engine idling, a plume of white exhaust rising into the crisp air. Leo climbed into the passenger seat and buckled his belt. "Ready?" David asked. Leo looked at his father, really looked at him. The grayness was still there, but the eyes were clear. The "we" David used now didn't feel like a haunting. It felt like a promise. "Yeah," Leo said. "I'm ready." As the car pulled away, disappearing into the vast, snowy silence of the mountains, Leo Miller finally stopped tapping. The click, click, click was gone, replaced by the steady, reliable rhythm of a heart that was no longer afraid to beat.